All right, I want to welcome everyone here to this James class. What we're going to be trying to do is divide up the two different kinds of letters there are in the New Testament. So the last class, which you can actually watch all of those online on the church's Facebook and on the church's YouTube page, the last one was over Romans, and this one is over James. And it seems like the two different kinds of letters, the letters that are written by Paul, and then there are the so-called pastoral epistles, sometimes called the early church letters. These are written by not Paul. These are written by different people. And the interesting thing is that the letters of Paul are very consistent, leaning heavily into justification by grace through faith. The other ones are as well. It just takes a little bit of looking to see that. When we think of Romans, the one that we think of that contrasts the most with Romans is the book of James. Many people are convinced that Lutherans hate the book of James. That is not necessarily the case. There is also this condemnation that Luther wanted to toss out the book of James. Luther was open to tossing out James and Revelation. Why? Because they were two of the last books to be accepted in the New Testament. He ultimately kept them because he believed that they, like the rest of the Bible, were the inspired Word of God. But Luther's problem with James is a little bit different than what people accuse him. People accuse him of being so terrified of justification by grace and works that he wanted to rid anything that even hinted of that throughout all of Scripture. Well, the fact of the matter is, Luther was right. Luther was absolutely right, because our inclinations are justification by grace and works. We want to sneak ourselves into our own salvation story. But the question is that what we find in James? Now, I remember being back in seminary. I went to a Methodist seminary, even though I was a Lutheran. And I actually took a class on several of these books, these New Testament letters, focusing primarily on James. And of course, I got a lot of ribbing and mocking, because when people read Luther, they only read a few sentences of Luther. They don't actually read all of Luther, all of what he's talking about. And they don't read the introduction as Luther is talking about this and referring to this as an epistle of straw. What they fail to realize is that at the end, Luther says, even though he has all of these problems with the way that the average person could understand James, and remember, that is what this is about. Luther's pastoral heart, he is angry and frustrated with people in the hierarchy using James to kind of beat people over the heads or demand that they work harder. Instead, his pastoral heart is demanding that, no, we need to accept justification by grace through faith alone. At the end of that introduction to the book of James, Luther says he still believes it is a decent work and has much to commend it. Funnily, people don't remember that part of Luther's statement. With that in mind, can we accept James? Well, here's the thing I learned when I was in that class, is that a lot of people don't get James right. We default into our old position. We default into our works righteousness. And we don't read James properly. Because in the book of James, there is a great deal of talk about being justified by grace alone. So let's get into this. Let's unpack it. Today we're going to go through two portions of this. If you've read ahead or read through the bulletins, you'll see that what we're talking about here in James today will be the introduction, just introductory material, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Well, not how, but the who, what, when, where, and why. As well as talking about the first chapter. So let's get right into it. Uh-oh. That's the end of the show. Goodbye, everybody. I forgot, I always put my first slide as my last slide. The Venerable Bede was a medieval writer, monk, scholar who lived in England way back in the medieval period. And Bede had this to say about this spiritual happiness, which seems to be the thrust of the book of James. These empty words. It's not your works that matter. It's rather the empty words that matter. Well, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound like what we've heard about James. I thought James is talking about our works and what we do. No, James will always start off with the Word. So let's ask some questions about this book. Who wrote it? When was it written? Why does the author feel the need to write it at all, especially with all of the criticisms that have been leveled against it? What's it about in the first place, and who is it supposed to be addressed to? Now, there are 5 options. 5 options for who could have written it, if we accept that it was written by someone named, well, James. And what's interesting is that it seems like all of these people here would be the best, most well-known individuals. But the person it usually falls to is James, the half-brother of Jesus. This is the person that church tradition has stated. And there's some good reasons for believing this. A lot of the issues about the timing and everything else just don't work with the other ones. So, it's important for us to remember that we don't have the James who we accept really attributed till the 3rd century AD. Again, that's very late in the game for dealing with a book in the Bible. James is going to be discussed until this point. It's going to constantly be brought up, and people are going to try and figure out whether or not they should include it or not. There were a lot of really good books that were actually left on the cutting room floor. Who here has read 1st and 2nd Clement? No one? Clement wrote sometime in the mid-2nd century, but people said, no, we can't seem to justify putting that in the Bible, even though it's a very good book. There were also quite a few heretical books that were justly left out. But anybody who says, oh, well, there's these secret Bible books that they left out because they wanted control, they obviously have not spent enough time in a New Testament class. Another thing, little bee in my bonnet, I'm still going to refer to him as James, but in the Greek his name is actually Jacob. It's Jacob. So if anybody wants to know, this is the book of Jacob. Iakobos, for those of you who really want to know how it's pronounced in Greek. Now, what's interesting is that if we accept this as Jesus' brother, he's not a disciple. Now, this starts to make a little bit of sense to me now. How does he come about? Well, we're told in 1 Corinthians 15:7 that Jesus actually appears to a bunch of people, and he appears to James. This is his half-brother. Now, seeing your half-brother come back from the dead when everyone had seen him murdered on a cross, obviously you'd start to rethink some of your priors. reinterpret all the things you happen to believe, that maybe, just maybe, all the things he was going on about in his life might actually have been true. But what else is interesting is, if this is the case, and this is the James that we're talking about, Jesus' earthly teachings and ministries, etc., 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 aren't the thing that led to James's faith. The thing that led to James's faith was seeing the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I think this is my understanding of this book, is the fact that James has a resurrection faith. James is not concerned, or did not live through all the laws that had been taught by Jesus, which is why he's bringing them up now. But James starts with the resurrection. James starts with the belief that Jesus has really accomplished his mission, the mission he set out to accomplish. Now, with that in mind, that blows a huge hole in the justification and works crowd. James believes this. He doesn't feel the need, because he's seen the resurrected Lord, he doesn't feel the need to go over that aspect of it, and instead is saying, this is what this looks like. Now, we've already gone over that, and we've gone over that. So when's this written? Well, we don't know. And it depends on who it is. Now, again, remember I said there were 5 options if we really do believe that it is James. Some people believe that it was James writing it. Some James writing it. Most likely James, the half-brother of Jesus, writing the Bible, or the book in the Bible. And then you have all of these compilers come in, and they edit it, and they make sure it works right. And then that would be around AD 120. That later date, and also the style of Greek, might actually lend one to believe that that is a valid argument. Another option is that James is actually someone who is trying to create a half measure between Christianity and the Christian faith, and make it palatable to the Jewish audience that would have been concerned with fulfillment of laws and obligations. I think as we read through this book together, I think we'll find that that's probably not the case. This is given the earliest one record. I don't believe this. Most scholars believe it was probably sometime between 50 and 60, and it was most likely James, the half-brother of Jesus. Now, I'm going to keep saying half-brother of Jesus. I'm sorry if there are any Catholics or Roman Catholics out there, because the Catholic teaching is the perpetual virginity of Mary, which means she never bore any other children. And when you refer to children or brothers or sisters, behold, as it says, these are my brothers and sisters, as Jesus talks about in the Gospel of Mark. He's actually referring to cousins, because we can't have Jesus having brothers and sisters, because that would ruin the whole perpetual virginity of Mary. As Lutherans, we believe Mary is super duper special, but we believe you don't have to be perpetually a virgin in order to be super duper special, and that she and Joseph had other children after Jesus, and these are the half-brothers and half-sisters of Jesus. In the future, I'll probably just drop the half and just refer to him as his brother, but just know what I'm talking about there. So why is it written? Well, there are 3 options that we have, 3 big options. One is that it's trying to apply the old Jewish legal covenants. Do these things and you'll be justified. This is why this is so popular with the justification by grace and works crowd, is because people say, okay, good. We're so glad we're through with Paul. We're so glad we don't have to learn about how Christ paid it all. Now we can have some concrete things that we can do to feel assured in our faith. Obviously, I don't agree with that one. You'll still see that, and you see that a lot. Or you might see its cousin or brother, depending on which denomination you want to adhere to, which states that, of course, we don't believe in justification by grace and works. We're not like those Christians over there, or we're not like that heretical sect there. No. But we do believe that when you are justified, you do have to live a perfectly moral life. I was listening recently to a sermon talking about the parable of the two men that went up to the temple to be forgiven. And one of them was a Pharisee, and the other one was what they call a publican, but he was probably a tax collector or something, sometimes translated that way. And they both go up. And we all know what the Pharisee says. Oh, thank you, God, that I'm not like this poor schmuck over here. I always tithe. My moral record is spotless. It's wonderful. It's great. It's beautiful. And what does the other guy say? The tax collector says, God, forgive me, for I'm a sinner. And both men, it says, come down, but only one of them is forgiven. And the implication, of course, is the tax collector. And what the pastor said after that was, isn't it interesting, though, that we think, yeah, he did that and he was forgiven up there, but, if he really meant that he was forgiven, if he really believed that, he'd live a life like the Pharisee, like the unforgiven one. That's how we approach James. You got to clean your life up after you're a Christian. James will talk about living a good moral life, but his reasons for doing so are completely different from what a lot of people imagine. Some people imagine he's also trying to overcorrect for Paul's theology. I don't see this. I don't see this because he and Paul in the writings actually have a pretty good relationship. They butt heads like brothers, but nothing of the animosity that you would see here. What James is doing is trying to describe life after we believe. Now, I've talked about this before, but I'll talk about it again. There's a difference between a prescription and a description. When I go in and I describe my symptoms, I am describing what is going on in my life, how my life looks right now. When the doctor prescribes me a medicine for that, the doctor is saying, if you do this, then this will happen to you. That's the difference. Description is how things look. Prescription is do this and it will be done. Justification or sanctification, both of those for Lutherans happen at the same time. What happens there? Everything is done by Christ. What happens when you have Christ in you? Well, James is going to set out to describe what the Christian life looks like. Other things to note is there is a criticism that James is a disjointed letter. Spoiler alert, James is a disjointed letter. It is, as one person said, J. Alec Motyer, if I'm correct, stated that it is as if you were handed the sermon notes from a very busy pastor. That is what it looks like. But we can discern certain themes in here. Certain themes about the sanctified life, the Christian witness, and the church community. Gerhard Ferde, someone who's always good to bring up in these, the high priest of justification by grace through faith, at least in the modern era. And he talks about the importance of good works, but notice that they are not the building blocks. They are the fruit of the Spirit. So once again, we go into Galatians, and we see how they're talking about the same thing here. Now, these are the different faith traditions understanding. We talked about this on Romans. I have cut and pasted it because it was so good. And I've cut and pasted it back here for you. It's important for you to know that Lutherans believe we're justified by faith. It comes to us through word and sacrament. It is a gift. Can you lose it? Yep, sure, you can reject the Holy Spirit. And when are we sanctified? This is the crucial difference. Lutherans believe we are sanctified at the same time we are justified. Sanctified means nothing more than we are made holy. I don't think God is going to justify you and then leave you to become holy on your own. Your holiness is Christ's holiness. Okay, so what's the point of doing good works? So the point is that we walk in that holiness. It's accomplished as a gift from God. It's following after Jesus, and it is accomplished through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. Let's go ahead and bring up Luther, because Luther is always important to bring up in these discussions. Luther also had that great quote, God doesn't need your good works, but your neighbor does. Your good works, here's the spoiler alert, your good works are for proclamation. That is the only thing your good works are. If you are looking to your good works to justify you or make you holy, sanctified, that means you are elevating yourself to the level of Christ. For Christ has accomplished that already. You're also looking to yourself to be the down payment on your holiness. No, but what happens is your neighbor is watching you, looking at you, wondering what it means to have a changed life. And here James is going to talk about being fearless in that change. So this is all about honing in on good works then. What does it mean? What is the point of good works? We have in America 3 major traditions. Yes, there are Greek Orthodox. Yes, they are extremely small. And they mostly fall into this group here. But for the main thing, it's the Roman Catholics, the Anglicans, and the Methodists who believe that your good works are something you work alongside God to accomplish, and that these bring about a justification and sanctification. The Calvinists are a little different. These are going to be a lot of your Baptists. They're also going to be the Presbyterians. They believe that no, you're saved by faith, but, and that but is always going to kill you, but your works show and demonstrate that you're saved by, or that you are part of the elect. Okay, well, we'd say, okay, that works. Therefore, if you are worried that you are not part of the elect, you need to go out and do more good works. And then you'll show that you're part of the elect. Well, that's just the backdoor works righteousness right there. Lutherans say if you're worried, just remember you're baptized. And when you're free in that baptism, when you're free in communion, when you're free in the gospel, then you'll want to do good works. Are you more willing to be charitable to others, kind to others, good to others, if you feel you have to, that there's a great deal of pressure? Or are you more willing to go out and do good things because you enjoy it, because something in you has changed so radically that you can't help but doing good works? That's what the Lutherans would say. It is proclaiming, look at this change that has happened in my life. So God's good works are a Spirit's gift. And guess what? James is all about this. Your good works, your good deeds bear the fruit of the Spirit. This is also why the Spirit seems to get so diminished the less we talk about good works and justification being the only thing, justification by grace through faith being the only way we're saved. Because then good works take the place of the Spirit. Good works, therefore, flow from a life that has been changed. And with that, we can go and proclaim the good news. So, this last part is the fact that we are brought together in community. Now, who is the audience? The audience is Jerusalem. But it's also really geared towards Jewish Christians, or it's geared towards Jews who have been dispersed, trying to help them understand through the obligations of the law how Christ has fulfilled it. If Christ has fulfilled the law, he's fulfilled that part of the covenant, and therefore good works are now possible to be accomplished. This is what James's message is about. So he's either talking about one or two of those things. All right. So let's go ahead and we'll read through James chapter 1. Who wants to read? I don't know. Let's just read 1 through 18.
James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all he does. The brother in humble circumstances ought to take pride in his high position, but the one who is rich should take pride in his low position, because he will pass away like a wild flower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossoms falls, and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich man will fade away even while he goes about his business. Blessed is the man who perseveres under, how far was I supposed to go? 18. Okay, under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone, but each one is tempted when, by his own evil desire, he is dragged away and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created.
Okay, so there's a lot there. And you can see what I was talking about at the outset, where I said that the book of James operates in this way that it looks like a bunch of loosely strung together ideas. In fact, one scholar, a guy by the name of Martin Debelius, refers to James, or thinks of James, as a book of Proverbs. It's like a book of Proverbs for the New Testament. And you can see that it's like the book of Proverbs in the New Testament, because, like Proverbs, it states this is how a life that is rooted in wisdom, and notice he starts out by talking about wisdom here. This is how a life rooted in wisdom is going to look. Now, of course, we have our good friend John Chrysostom. John Chrysostom, one of the the early preachers. This is a person who, if he were alive today, would have his own radio show and would a Sunday morning radio program or whatnot. He was well known throughout his area. Now, structure of James 1, such that it is, and again, when I say structure, I use it in its loosest possible connotation. There's very little structure here, but we can discern a couple of things. First off, we've got the introduction. Good news is, because we did the introduction, we're not going to do the introduction here, even though the introduction's only what? Yeah, 1 verse long. But instead, I guarantee you, the rest of it we will not be spending the same amount of time for just 1 verse. Next, we'll talk about the trials of faith, and then proclamation of good works. Now, what I love about James, is the way he starts off. And this is something I've noticed whenever I've delivered a sermon, which is how easy it is when I'm reading the text to just completely ignore the first part of the text. We want to get into the meat of things. So, foundation. Rejoice in your testing, he states. Count it as all joy when you have these trials. And again, the word for trials is testing. God is looking to bring about your completion through these things. This is like the stress tests that are put on things to make sure that everything is secure. So, he states, don't doubt. Now, this gets a little confusing. What do we mean with doubt? Now, he is not talking about momentary doubts. And this becomes abundantly clear, especially as we read this section, and then we get to the second to last section in this portion. Doubt, he describes in 2 ways. First off, he says it's like waves breaking on the shore. Anyone who has watched waves come in realizes just how incredibly disposable one wave is compared to the next. They are just constant, and you can't really see anything. That's what it is. Last night, in fact, I had something in my brain. You ever try and go to bed with something rattling around in your brain? It's just constant. It's a constant doubting, worrying about things. And they just break on the sea one right after another, and yet there's nothing to them. What he talks about is the fact that just as the waves are inconsistent and transitory, a person who gives themselves over to doubting, and that's really what he's dealing with here, a person who gives himself over to doubting becomes just like those waves. Just like the waves of doubt that keep breaking on that person. That's the first thing. So the first part is that if you give in to your doubts, you will become inconsistent and temporary. Next, doubters are double-minded. It uses the word double-minded here, or it's often translated as double-minded. But the word that's used is dipsukos, which means double-souled. It's where we get the word psychology from, is the psukos in there. A dipsukos is one who is double-souled. It's having 2 souls. This is probably, I would say, the most insightful thing that you see in the book of James. Because a person who is double-souled, or we might refer to that person as being two-faced, but it goes deeper than that, doesn't it? Because someone can be two-faced. They can be intentionally duplicitous to you, which also comes from that two-faced notion. But we also know in our own lives that we have those moments. I thought about this a lot, and I thought, what does it mean to be a moral person, to be a good person, a person in good standing with your neighbors? And what I've found is a good way to measure oneself is to ask am I the same person in private when no one's looking that I am in public? To have no boundaries there. Now, of course, we're human beings. We all have parts of ourselves. We don't want to air our dirty laundry, and that's not what I'm talking about. But then again, you can go the opposite extreme and try and put everything in the dirty laundry category so that you end up being two different people. That's what he's talking about here. Notice he starts off not with works that you do. The doubting he's referring to isn't the doubt that you do or the doubt of works. It's your posture. And posture is a faith quality. So if your posture is that you're inconsistent and transitory, that's one thing. If your posture is that you are two-faced, that's another thing. What he's saying is these doubts, this doubtful existence is very much like what Ecclesiastes talks about when Ecclesiastes refers to vanity. The word is hevel. It means mist or transitory vapor. This is the person who doubts. So he's not saying if you're doubting, if you don't have enough faith, then God's not going to hear your prayers. What he's saying is if you live your life in a way that only kind of mouths your prayers, but your heart is postured towards something else, directed towards something else for your salvation, then you are living a false life. You are a doubter because you doubt that God is who God says he is. He then transitions to talking about the wealthy and the poor. And what he talks about with the humble, it's interesting, falls back into the whole notion of testing, doesn't it? Because I don't know about you, you go outside and you see some of the lantanas. Sometimes in the middle of summer, I ask myself, I don't know how the lantana actually survives in the middle of August here, especially during a drought. But, it survives and it's beautiful when it flowers in its own way. But you wouldn't be able to do that with an orchid, maybe. And so what he's talking about are the fact that when the tests of life come, those who are rooted in something deeper and have their identity in something deeper, the sun may come, but they shine out all the more beautiful in the midst of the conditions. But those who look for earthly blessings end up being scorched and burned away. This isn't a work that you and I perform, though, because this is a gift that comes to us. This should be something that we should notice here, and which Debbie talked about when she talks about how the all of these things come from God. The fact that the flower is able to survive is that it exalts in the fact that it is tied to a deeper nature, and that God has promised to come to us here in verse 12 when we are under trial. This is a critical point for us to remember, because James so often gets warped and bent into, if you're having troubles, you just need to dig down deeper and overcome those troubles. And if you overcome those troubles, then you'll prove that you're one of God's elect. But in reality, what James is saying, when troubles come and trials come, what should you do? You should run back to the cross. Remember that God is God. That's where James finds his identity. All right. Finally, it ends that we are the first fruits. Again, we should think back to Galatians, and Paul's talking about those. We should think back to how We are this first fruits of the new creation. And what is being said here is not just that you and I, our works are our first fruits. No. What James says is that you are the first fruits. You are the works that are being accomplished. And that gets us back, or to the next section here. Who wants to read 19 through 27?
My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. For man's anger does not bring about his righteous life that God desires. Therefore get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says, is like a man who looks at his face in a mirror, and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But the man who looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues to do this, not forgetting what he has heard, but doing it, he will be blessed in what he does. If anyone considers himself religious and yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, he deceives himself, and his religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world.
Okay. So, obviously, we have people who like to pick and choose in this particular area. They focus in on the giving of charity. They focus in on the looking after the widows and the orphans, and those things are wonderful, but those are fruits that are born. We are to lead with receiving. That is the key part. We can't give until we have received. We cannot give the gifts that are given to us until we accept them freely and unconditionally. Notice what it says here at the very end of, at the end of the first paragraph in 21. Therefore put away all filthiness, that's the worldly dirt that sticks to you, and rampant wickedness, all this world stuff, all the things that the world puts on as a priority. Get rid of that. Put it away. Set it aside. And receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your soul. Now, I think what's important for us to remember is that it is not the action of putting away those things, even though that helps us to receive the word, but it is receiving the word that saves us. And that word we are to receive. That's not you are to go out and find, you are to earn, you are to achieve enlightenment. You are to receive with meekness, with humility. This understanding that you are not worthy to receive it. You will receive it in that way. A word that is implanted. An implanted word. This is not a word that you and I make. This is not a deed that you and I do. No, this word is freely given. It is stuffed into your heart. It is like when you have to switch out some part that's broken in your car. It's like having to install a new program to make your computer actually run. This is what's happening. When this happens, then everything else flows from it. But until that happens, until you receive the word, you won't be able to do anything. So what do you mean? Be doers of the word, not just hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if someone is a hearer of the word, doesn't do it. Now people say, aha, there's the works. There it is. I knew it was there. I knew the works righteousness. No. That's faith. That's pure faithfulness right there. When Luther and his protege Melanchthon talk about this, Melanchthon especially in his wonderful book, Commonplaces. Melanchthon was Luther's second in command, and in Commonplaces, Melanchthon talks about something very interesting here. He talks about how when we sin, the actions are irrelevant on God's scheme. Now granted, they're not irrelevant in our world, because we're only looking at what it produces. If I go out, God forbid, and commit murder, that would be worse than me thinking, I wish this person didn't exist. But in God's world, just entertaining the thought and thinking in agreement, yeah, I really, life would be much better if that person didn't exist, is just as bad, because it's looking to something else other than God to bring about happiness or completion or sustainability. And so what he's talking about here, don't just be doers. When you do something, you're performing obedience to it. If you say, I really enjoy cooking, great. What have you cooked? Well, I shove things in the microwave from time to time. That's not really enjoying cooking. You're not proclaiming your love of cooking with your actions. And so once again, you're double-minded. But that's not a work. That's a faith. Because you're not looking to cooking to bring happiness. And so this is what he's talking about. When you do these good works, when you do these deeds, what you're doing is you're proclaiming, yes, I really enjoy this. If I have, if I go home and I tell you, I love my wife. I love my wife. We never talk, we don't see each other, but I love my wife. I make sure I never pick up anything that I leave lying around because I love my wife so much. No! You wouldn't say that. Your words and your deeds are proclamation. And I've often brought up this illustration. There are things I do because I'm married that I would never do at work. I would never at work be around a sick person. My toddler, my little girl who I love, who drives me crazy. Do you think if I was working at Starbucks where I worked before here, that if someone said, hey, look, we had an accident in the bathroom and someone needs you to change their pants, I would be like, yeah, sure, that's within my job requirements. No, I'd be handing in my apron and heading out the door. My toddler needed her diaper changed. Yeah, it's part of the job. Why do I do it? Not because I'm getting paid, not because I think it'll earn me brownie points. It's a way to show love and affection for my family, for my wife, for my child, for everyone. And that's really the reason why we do good works. So words are cheap. Words are cheap and they can be wild horses. So he's talking about words are cheap here one way. Now he's talking about how words are cheap in another way. Words are not just cheap when they're divorced from action. Words are also cheap when we're gossiping, which is one of those baptized sins. It's one of those sins that follows us into the church and that it's socially acceptable that we get a pardon for doing within the church. We're able to do that. We have to watch what we say. And we all have different ways. Some people it's gossip. For me, it's sometimes I forget that I'm not funny. And when I forget that I'm not funny, I try and say funny things which aren't funny at all, and they just are awkward and cruel sometimes. So I realize that, and so I keep my tongue bridled, and I realize maybe I should think before I say this. Maybe I should think before this horse gets loose. So cheap words undo good works too. But these aren't the works that we're doing because they come from the heart. They emerge from the heart. Either a posture of failing to do good works or doing evil works, or a posture of looking to use cheap words to elevate our status. So with that in mind, right words, therefore, are consistent and they reinforce our witness. And then, when that happens, James says, then the word is preached. Then people come to believe and people see the truth. And with that, we are finished with chapter 1. All right. Have a wonderful, we'll see you later, and I'll see you here on Thursday for this all over again. And I'll also see you guys next week as we continue on with chapters 2 and 3.